I was on a road trip with my mistress. I know what you're thinking. Dirty guy, but I've been unhappily married for 25 years, and I need a little fun when I work hard. My wife is a darn sour puss, and always puts me down. Allison, my secretary, treats me like I'm a king, and I sure as hell enjoy it. Anyway, I digress. Let me get back to what I'm writing about. As I said, I was on a road trip with my secretary Allison, whose last name I won't reveal, but she has never been to Los Angeles, so I wanted to take her to go see Hollywood, specifically the Hollywood sign. She's beautiful and deserves the world. I hope one day she makes it to Hollywood. She certainly has the talent. Anyway, we stopped at an old diner along the 425 freeway. It's pretty much desert out there, and the crickets are pretty much non-existent. I mean, you could hear a penny drop from a mile away. So as we're driving, Allison spots an old diner, the sort of place frequented by truck drivers and bums. Well, maybe not bums, but maybe old-timers desperate for conversation. I told her that we gotta eat somewhere good, but she just wanted a milkshake and was fine with the old diner thing. And I guess what my girl wants, she gets. So I pulled in, and as you can imagine, people are staring at my dark Range Rover, pulling into the dusty old dump. She went in to go get her milkshake. She sure would get guys gawking at her with how good her figure looked. I mean, like I said, she was gold. She sure knew how to make a man stare, and I was proud of her. So while she was doing that, I decided it was best to use the bathroom. And this place didn't even have a good indoor bathroom, but it just had a little cabin behind the diner. I walked back there, and my shoes clicking against the dry pebbles. The heat was just making my eyes tired and itchy, but I also felt tired and worn out from driving so much. So I went to open the door to the bathroom, and I heard a rustling from inside. I thought, shoot, there must be another person in there. But then the rustling stopped. At that moment, the door was kicked open, and I fell back, right onto my back. My suit was no doubt destroyed at this point, but there's no way I could continue standing. What I saw standing there in front of me terrified me to the core. It was a beast, or at least as the best I can describe it. It was large, and it towered over me. It had to have easily been 7 feet tall. Its face kind of reminded me that of a greyhound, or dog-like, and its body was dark and black. Its legs were strong, and it had rippling muscles all throughout its fur. But its eyes were the most horrifying, haunting part. They appeared bloodshot and glowed a dull red, and this thing looked at me, very menacingly. It scared the hell out of me. I'm not ashamed to admit that I pissed my pants right there in the baking heat. This thing howled at me, and I closed my eyes and prayed to my mother in heaven for protection. I began to think I had died and woke up in hell with this thing in front of me. This thing stepped closer and growled at me, ever so more aggressive. I thought it was going to rip me limb from limb. I clutched onto the dry earth, as if to squeeze the life out of the creature, but it didn't budge. This thing just stood there, growling at me, staring at me, into my soul. I began to think somebody must have spiked a drink, but I hadn't drank anything in the diner. This was real, and it was happening, clear as day. My legs seemed to get slightly stronger. This thing lowered its head, as if to look at me more carefully, and then in a flash of light, took off running. I didn't even see where it went. It was so incredibly fast. It just ran off into the distance and disappeared from sight. I was so terrified. My legs seemed to get slightly stronger, and perhaps my prayers were answered, and I got up and ran back to the car. Allison just looked at my pants and started laughing, but then she saw my face and got worried. I told her about what had happened, and as understanding as she was, she said that I had been driving for too long. I'm beginning to think this wasn't just a crazy dream or a horrible hallucination. Are you able to check the area and see if there have been other similar sightings at all? Because I know you're the monster guy, and even though I don't believe in monsters, what I saw that day, I don't know what else to call it, but a monster that's not supposed to exist. It's an emotional thing for me to even write about this experience that I had. I can already feel my hands shaking and nerves rising deep within my stomach, making me feel nauseous. I've been a resident of Ealing, London since I was a kid. I'm 46 now and have a successful career in public relations. Because my job is so stressful, I normally go for a walk every night at around 11 p.m. I know it sounds late for a woman to walk, but I've always been pretty steely and brave. I never felt unsafe as I always meet people walking, and I've never had any bad experiences in 20 years. I've never married, and I live alone with a small cat. Well, this experience happened just a few weeks ago, and I'm only now getting the strength to write about it. It was early November, and the weather was pleasant enough. It was dry, but there was a chill in the air. My grandmother used to say that November brought the falling of the leaves, and that is, November brings death. As I walked along the streets, they were oddly secluded. It seemed that not another soul was out. It made me feel irritably and incredibly cautious that something terrible was about to happen. You know that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach? That's the best way I can describe it. As I said, I'm pretty brave, but this just felt different. I began to feel an odd presence, as if I was walking into something terrible and deadly. I took a deep breath and kept walking, down a long, straight street with typical shops and pubs. There were a few shops open, but they were all oddly quiet and deserted. Usually, the pubs would be stuffed and have many people, but they were all secluded. I decided to keep walking because I was trying to lose a few pounds anyway before Christmas. A brisk pace, and I decided to go even a little faster to get back to my apartment quicker. I was walking past an old library that had closed years before. It gave me the creeps even looking in. They still had some old books and old furniture covered in dust, years of neglect. I remember going in there as a young girl, enjoying reading all sorts of books which took me to a new place. Maybe that's why I have such an active imagination, because I spent years crouched over a book, soaking up all the characters and imagining myself in the plot. Books take me to a different reality, and I love reading stories about witches, wizards, dragons, and other odd things. Well, that was before I encountered the following sighting. Up until then, I realized that such odd creatures only existed in the imaginations of writers. I would have thought somebody was a kook if they claimed to see a unicorn, a dragon, or even a Bigfoot. The library was now a dusty old building, but I can still remember being a little girl, curling up on the colorful carpet and listening to the librarian reading out a story about a mystical land where all sorts of creatures existed. The memory sends a shiver up my spine now. I kept walking briskly past the library when I looked around the corner and saw something that made my blood run cold. This figure was huge, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, and had black fur all over its body. It was standing there, as if trying to conceal itself from the light. It opened up its mouth, revealing a huge set of teeth, razor sharp like a shark. The creature began moving towards me, and I briefly glanced around to see if anybody else was on the road. But no, I was all alone. Was this a bear? Surely not. This was a creature I had never seen before, but it looked angry and intent on destruction. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was terrified. The figure was ferocious and seemed angry. It resembled a wolf, but only larger, and stood up on 2 legs, more terrible and deadly than I could ever imagine. I was pretty sure that if it got up to me, it would annihilate me, tear out my insides and eat me. I became utterly aware of my humanity in that moment, my very weakness. I reached into my handbag. If only I had a gun, I could shoot this thing coming towards me. But of course, I didn't have a weapon. My eyes blinked several times to ensure that what I was seeing was real. This thing was slowly walking towards me. My hands were shaking unlike anything I have ever experienced. Besides, if I tell anybody or call anybody, they're going to think I'm insane. This was hands down the most bizarre and frightening thing I'd ever seen. I somehow was so scared that I was frozen in place, even though this beast was approaching me. My eyes were just utterly transfixed on the sight, and I tried to urge myself to resume running, but I just couldn't. Suddenly, this thing stopped in its tracks and opened its mouth even more, exposing its giant teeth. They were even sharper than I could have imagined. I thought I was about to die. This thing gave me an evil grimace. It's like it was letting me know that it was about to get me, and that I was just a little mouse and this was a killer cat. I don't know how or when, but at some point, in that moment, my legs began working, and I took off running as fast as I could, and I didn't stop until I got home. Even now, the encounter is hard for me to talk about, and has left me traumatized. I no longer go out walking at night, and I have never heard of such a bizarre instance here in London. I don't know. I decided to do some research in the time being, but I couldn't find much. I know that werewolves don't exist, but this thing, I guess, resembles kind of like that. I looked up some more things online, and came across your channel, based upon your thumbnails on your videos. I hate to say it myself, but I want to conclude that I saw one of these creatures myself. But everything I've heard on your channel says that they only exist in North America, so I really don't know. All I know is that was one nightmare of a night that I don't wish to relive. What do you think?